Welcome, everyone. Glad you could join us for the However podcast. I'm Mike.
And I'm Zach. You know what I saw today?
I don't know.
I saw a pit bull eating a baby. You know what I did? I ate the pit bull.
However, that's not what we're talking about today. So, Zach told me about this post. This is several months ago that said that 30 to 50% of the people in the world do not have an inner dialogue. They do not have an inner voice that is speaking and or talking. And, you know, we started talking about that, about how important it actually is to have one. Because what happens is when you don't have one of those things, when you don't have an inner voice, well, it seems like people make bad choices, do kind of dumb things when they aren't utilizing that inner voice. So we thought we would bring it up and talk about it because it was really interesting to us. Mm-hmm. So, Zach, I think the thing that we want to talk about first is, one, what our inner voice kind of sounds like, because unfortunately, we're both the kind of people that have an inner voice that is like 24/7. And you know what? Honestly, sometimes I feel crazy. I feel crazy because it's happening all the time. But it affects us when somebody else doesn't have one. So, I mean, what's an example of something that somebody who doesn't have an inner voice will do that'll just plain make you mad?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I saw that post, it was kind of like a light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, that makes so much sense. I mean, the biggest thing that I can think of is obviously when I'm driving. And one of the first things that my dad ever taught me was always drive like everyone else on the road is an idiot.
Good. That's good advice, by the way.
It is. I mean, honestly, it has saved me from so many accidents. And what I recognized while I'm driving is that I'm constantly analyzing everything that's going on around me. I'm constantly, even if it's like subconsciously, some of it is, most of it is consciously telling myself what I think is going to happen or what I think someone else is going to do. I'm always very aware of everything that's kind of going on around me when I'm driving. What I realize is it doesn't seem like everyone else has that same thought going on in their head. Like, say when you're taking a dual turn lane,
okay,
both turning left.
Yeah, I can see it coming.
Got 3 lanes that you can go into. Obviously, the innermost lane goes to the innermost lane. Your lane goes to the middle lane, but they also have the option to go to the outer lane, but then you've also got like the yield that comes there. Typical situation.
All right, yeah, I see it.
I say at least like 40% of the time, if I'm on the outside, the other person's on the inside, and we're both turning, at least 40% of the time, they'll just come straight over into my lane.
Without consideration.
Without even thinking. They just do it. And I guess when I'm in that place, I'm already thinking, who's behind me? How close are they? Who's next to me? How close are they? Who's over there in the yield lane? How close am I going to be? Are they going to cut across all 3 lanes? Is this person going to cut across? So it's like I've got all of these different thoughts. I'm always talking to myself. And I don't know if it's maybe like a risk aversion thing for me or what it is. And I mean, that's just while I'm driving. I mean, even in my everyday life, when I'm at work, when I'm at home, I mean, honestly, I think the only time that I'm not talking to myself is when I'm engaged in something that is activating several stimuli. Like when I'm at the gym, if I'm lifting weights and I've got my music into all of that, the voice is a little bit quieter. Sometimes it's still talking to me because I'm still kind of watching people and I'm still kind of talking to myself about whatever might be going on or whatever the case.
But you're also like planning. You're like looking around. It's like, okay, what's my next exercise? Okay, that guy's on that machine. That guy's on that machine. There's a girl over there. Okay, so my next exercise, I'm going to go over there because you're reading the room.
Right.
You're seeing what's going on. You're reading the room, and you're basically planning your next move by actually recognizing what's going on around you, and your inner voice is giving you that information, right?
Right. But, and I'd say a lot of the times it is like that. Some of the times it's like voices that I don't even want to be there, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like I'm talking to myself, but I don't even really want to be talking. It's almost like I'm having a conversation that I'm too drained to have, but it's happening without my consent. It's like when you get stuck with that one relative that just won't shut up and you can't walk away because they just keep talking and you're in a very small room and no one is coming to save you, so you just have to stand there and listen to them for the next 20 minutes. That's kind of how it feels like sometimes when the inner voice is just always on and there's only a very limited number of places where it's not. I think one of the things that I've used as sort of a coping mechanism, and some of you guys or girls out there, you might relate to this, is when I play video games, and which is not as prevalent as it used to be, but that's one of those places where I'm so focused on something else that it's like the only place where the inner voice is just shut down. It doesn't have as much control over me, and I don't necessarily know why that is in that specific situation, but usually that's kind of like, and I think I've heard other people talk about that before, where it's like that's their escape from the voice.
Okay.
So I don't know if you have anything like that,
No.
any like activity that you maybe do that's kind of the escape from the voice.
I really don't. I mean, I do actually. When I just watch TV, sometimes it just shuts off because that's the thoughtless. And I think we all get to the point at the end of a day where like, all right, I just need to do something brainless so that my brain will shut down. But when I'm out in situations, this is where I think it impacts us the most, is when let's just go there. When I'm at the supermarket, I'm at the supermarket, it's a Sunday afternoon usually. There's a million people. I know. There's a million people there. To go. And you've got that one family in front of you. Where they're all walking next to each other, blocking the entire lane in the cereal aisle, and all I want to do is get down to the coffee. And they stand there, they stop crossing the lane with no recognition that anybody else is even around, having a conversation, and there's like 50 people that are now backed up behind me, all having the same thought: start moving or get out of the way. Mm-hmm. And it's like, don't those people get? Don't they get it? Oh. Don't they, like, they turn around and look or something, recognize that you are blocking everything, and we all want to get our shopping done. All right. Yeah. I'm sorry. And I know my wife, when we shop together, she's like, okay, don't look at them. Don't say anything. Don't say anything. Just don't even walk by. Don't huff. Don't puff. And I'm like, but honey,
They're in my way.
They need to know.
They're in my way.
They're in my way.
I just
you know what? And it feels like sometimes that people, when they don't have that inner voice, that they don't get what's going on around them. Yeah. It feels like they're so self-absorbed that they don't have that voice in their head that's saying, hey, what's going on around you? Plan accordingly so you don't impact other people negatively. I mean, the whole thing on the road, okay? When you're driving and you've got that one person that's like, okay, I'm going to pull over now, and good luck everyone behind me. And they do that whole thing. And all of a sudden, everyone now is slamming on their brakes because somebody didn't plan ahead, doesn't read the road, and just starts going lane to lane to lane.
Or like when
it just gets annoying.
Or you've got the
think.
Like you've got the zipper merge. It's like everyone knows when it ends, but you always get that line of people that will always go all the way up to the very end without a thought of anyone else, and they just start moving. And it doesn't matter if you're there, it doesn't matter if they're right next to you. They put their blinker on thinking, okay, my turn. And then they just start going. They just go. I think in those kind of situations, it's all about them.
Okay.
There is no consideration for anyone or anything else around them. It is just, this is where I need to be.
So I guess the question is do they have an inner voice? And is it just the inner voice so self-centered that it doesn't include anything outside of themselves in it? Or are they just really unaware?
And
mean,
I think
are they just unaware and they're not having those conversations because they're all inside their own head without anything going on?
And I think those are two different things, because I think, given your example on the grocery store versus a zipper merge, I think the people in the zipper merge, they have the voice, but it's more so just self-centered. It's just about them. They know what they're doing. They know how bad of a person they're being. They know how much of an asshole they're being.
But do they?
I think they do. Because then as soon as you start honking, they start flipping you off and start,
Right,
yelling at you like you're the problem. So it's like, I think they know, and they just don't want to be called out for their bad behavior. When it comes to people in the grocery store who are just standing there, I think those people are just straight up unaware of what's going on. Because I do the same thing all the time. I'm a person, if I'm going shopping, I know what I'm going to get. I know exactly what I'm looking for. Yeah. I know exactly where it is.
We're not
and
strolling.
I'm beelining it.
It's a mission.
Right there.
That's
I know
it's a mission.
Right. I don't want to be there any longer than I have to. So I'm going straight there. And the problem that I keep facing, especially when I go to like Winco, is it feels like most everyone else there is just so unaware of everything that they're doing.
But you can tell every now and again. Well, actually, I would say about 50% of the time, when there's somebody standing in the middle of the aisle, right? And they're not even turned around, but they can feel. It's almost like they feel someone coming up behind. It's like there's, and you know that because without even looking, you see them just kind of move their basket to the side. It's like they're aware of their surroundings, and that inner voice says, hey, I might be inconveniencing somebody if I stand here too long. I'm going to move out of the way so that somebody can get by. And so I see that happening. So I would say that's where that 50% comes in, because about 50% of the time, somebody will actually move out of the way without ever looking, like they're just feeling it. They know. And so their voice has said to them, move over.
Like, even if I feel like I know I'm about to do something stupid, let's take it back to the road. Even if I know I'm gonna have to do something stupid, I'll always still be thinking of who's in front of me, who's behind me, and who's next to me, because I don't unintentionally want to put someone in danger. So even if I have to do something that might be a little bit stupid, I still want to make sure that I'm at least keeping responsibility for not unintentionally causing someone else to wreck because of my stupid decision.
So your stupid choices are intentional.
Yes. Absolutely.
Congratulations.
I have no problem being intentionally stupid, because I feel like unintentionally stupid puts a lot more people at risk.
Yeah, that might be true, but then you don't have an excuse.
My excuse is I'm intentional.
That's not an excuse.
I know what I'm doing.
No,
I know what I'm doing.
That's like saying I'm an intentional asshole. And if you're an asshole because you don't know it, that's worse. No,
I knew I was going to shoot you, so it's not my fault if you get hurt.
That's right. I'm sorry. I would actually have less grace for you than I would for those other people. And,
really?
No, and yes, and here's why. All right, here's
but again, if I am intentionally avoiding the risk while doing the stupid behavior versus someone who is unintentionally putting someone else at risk because they're not thinking.
I know, and it's the not thinking when they should. I get that. But when it comes right down to it, if you know you're going to do something stupid, then you're making a legitimate choice.
Yeah.
Somebody who is really, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the word clueless about their surroundings, and they do something stupid, and okay, here's how I know I do this. When somebody does something stupid in front of me and I drive past them, and I have a bad habit of just kind of glancing over. We all do it.
Glancing? You stare.
Okay, so I stare
into their soul with like this absolute just like menacing. You will death stare this person until they look at you.
Okay. However, that
I don't even know. I just glance over. No, you don't.
That might be true. But when I look at somebody with the death stare and I recognize that they're like 80 years old, right? Okay. There is something that happens in my heart that says, all right, you know what? That was unintentional. That person is simply, I mean, when somebody's got their chin on the steering wheel and they're doing this bit, You know what? They're just trying to be safe, and they probably did the very best they could with what they had at that moment.
Yeah.
So, you know what? I've got a lot more grace when it comes to that than Karen, who is in her SUV with her phone up to her ear
And two kids in the
and
back.
two kids in the back, and she's doing the same thing. Okay, and Karen could be a guy or a girl. Okay?
No. The male equivalent is Chad.
Okay,
You've got
so
Chads and
Chad
Karens.
wow, I learned something new today. So that I'm sorry, I expect more out of people who are who should know better, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where those people who are unintentionally being stupid or doing something without that inner voice, right?
Mhm.
Nothing is they're not thinking, they're just doing. I don't have as much grace for those people. Okay, I just don't. So the intentional part of it
Yeah.
makes you worse than the person who's like 75, 80 years old, who really unintentionally is just trying to get through because they're so scared to be on the freeway.
And to me, I mean, I get what you're saying, but
All right.
to me, I think when I see someone like that, my immediate thought is, please stop driving.
Oh, well, of course.
Because that's the thing. If they don't know what they're doing, and like, absolutely, if they're trying their best, that's not the problem for me. The problem is your best is still unintentionally putting people at risk because of your very poor driving. That to me is a bigger problem than someone who is intentionally doing something stupid while at least considering the people around him.
Okay.
That's kind of, and so I think there's like almost the three categories of people. There's the unintentional stupid. There's the intentional stupid with consideration. Then there is the intentional stupid without consideration. So
you're a considerate asshole.
I am. I'm a considerate asshole.
Okay.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
Well, I'm glad we got that straight today.
Because then there's the inconsiderate assholes who do the same stupid things that I do, except they put way more people at risk because they don't really care what happens.
You're right. And those are the people that are just self-centered. And I think their inner voice, maybe they do have it, and all they're really thinking is, I'm more important than you. I'm more important than you.
Right.
So I'm just going to do. So you know what? I totally agree with that.
But so I think there is kind of like levels of the inner voice that have different priorities, maybe.
I'm sorry, I'm still getting over the whole you're a considerate asshole.
Shut up. I'm okay with being considerate.
That's fine. I'm glad we've agreed.
I'm good with that, because everyone, you know what, everyone does stupid things. I'd rather be.
You're right.
I'd rather have my stupid decisions at least be somewhat considerable instead of my stupid decisions like just being stupid decisions. I mean, really.
Okay, all right.
But I think, and again, I think it's one of those. I think the only reason that I'm considerable when I do stupid things is because I'm still thinking. I'm still just
right. You're processing the information.
Right. The inner dialogue is still constantly moving. It's still constantly telling me what's going on around me. And I don't even know where it comes from. Well, as far as I know, I mean, I did a little bit of research into it because I was very curious.
Yeah.
And from my understanding, there really aren't a lot of studies on it. There's just a lot of theories because, I mean, how are you supposed to study something that you can't necessarily
It's an internal human experience.
Right, exactly. So it's not necessarily something you can calculate. I know they've done studies. Let's see, what was the one? They were doing studies, and they did it by having people journal pretty much every day. They had them start journaling all of their inner thoughts, basically.
Well, and okay, so I think I read that same study, and the way that study worked was that they actually put a beeper on. I don't know if this was the one that but there was a study that was done where they had people wearing beepers, and the beeper would go off at random times during the day. And when the beeper went off, then that person would have to stop and write down exactly what it was that was going on in their mind, whatever thought it was, whatever inner dialogue was happening, or if there was nothing. And so what they found was that there were levels. There were actually there were a whole lot of levels as far as the amount of inner dialogue that was going on in people's heads. Now that's still somebody writing down their inner experience, and it was there. It's not really that reliable. Okay. It's still trying to, but what they found was that people who did it had varying levels of occasional, like very little inner dialogue. They had some people that were occasional. They had some people that were regular. And then they had people like us that were just 24/7, which really isn't 24/7 because there is a way to turn it on and off, like we talked about. But when nothing else is going on around me, then yes, I'm, you know what, that inner voice is. And and I think that for me, because I drive back and forth long distances on a pretty regular basis, I actually find that that's going on. And for me, it's about planning.
Mhm.
It's about planning my next move based on what's going on around me. And that always shows up in my driving in traffic. And I'm hoping everybody does this, but I don't know that I am constantly who's ahead of me, who's beside me, who's behind me. If I have to move, what's that truck going to do? Oh,
Right.
there's driving language. When you see the trucker, it's like you can tell his wheels are
Yeah.
starting to
Oh
come,
yeah.
and you can kind of see it
Very
happening.
minimal.
Right, but you start recognizing it, and that inner voice is always telling me, okay, look to this side if you need to get out. It's always about,
Right.
and I think that actually, for driving, that occurred when I got my motorcycle license,
Mm.
because as a guy on a motorcycle,
You have to be
oh
really
yeah,
aware.
you got to know
Yeah.
exactly what's going on, because
Yeah.
people are going to miss you. They're not going to see you, and you better be reading the road with every single move. Otherwise, you might as well just sign your own death certificate, because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's probably where that became very prevalent for me. However, what I think is going on, and I read some other studies. One of the guys that I think is one of the coolest theorists, he was a socio-behavioral theorist back in like 1920s, 1930s. His name was Vygotsky. Okay, and he was around with Freud and Erikson and all those guys that were doing all the psychosocial theories
Mhm.
back in, like, I mean, really, he was born in like 1920, but he was doing his theories in like the 50s and 60s alongside these other dudes. And one of the things he said was that the inner voice, and he was a psychosocial theorist that talked about the development of people. And what he said was your inner voice is actually something that is developed in early childhood from the time you start speaking. Because if you think about a child in a preschool setting at 2 and at 3 and at 4, when they are doing whatever activity they're doing, oftentimes they're talking
Yeah.
or they're making noise, and the noise and the activity is actually impacting the brain, and that's where language comes from. And as children get, this is what Vygotsky said, is as children get older, that outward voice that is driving their activity or their behavior gets quieter externally because it's being internalized.
Mm.
Right. So once you internalize that voice, and according to Vygotsky, what he said was it was about planning. It was about self-regulation. It was about, hold on, there's a couple of the things I got to read my paper here. Self-regulation, self-reflection, emotional regulation, and perspective taking. Okay. These are the things that Vygotsky was like, hey, this is what it's doing. And children do that from very early, and that's part of their learning process.
Mm-hmm.
So Vygotsky, man, I think he really had it right personally, because that inner voice is that thing that you start as a child as external, and it gets internalized, that helps you deal with situations. I mean, when a situation's coming up, like, and this is something I do, I will run through a conversation in my head about 50 times before I actually have to have that conversation, because I always want to, one, regulate my emotions if it's a hard conversation to have. I want to make sure that I am not stumbling over my words, so I practice it internally in my head. I want to make sure that whatever perspective I'm taking is understandable and reasonable. And so I'm playing this thing out in my head all the time. That's what Vygotsky says that we do. That was his theory as we get older, that's the purpose of the inner voice. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I think, and this is not Vygotsky, this is the Psychology Book According to Mike, having done a little bit of research and having worked with kids for a long time, and having worked over the last several years in the realm of people who have had trauma. Mm-hmm. All right. If you think about some of the theories in early childhood, and you think about where kids get stuck, okay, in their development, oftentimes they get emotionally stuck, they get physically stuck, they get educationally stuck. When trauma happens, it actually puts the brakes on development. And oftentimes kids will have this break where they don't move on. Like, if the trauma's bad enough, and it happens at a certain point in their development, they actually have a break in that development, and sometimes they never come back. If that's the case, what if children who are in traumatic situations, who are told that their outward voice isn't safe, they never develop the inner voice because they haven't gone through the process of actually speaking out loud. Like, let's say their parents didn't honor their outer voice so that they could do that process. What if their parents weren't actually involved in the process of helping them have that outer voice?
Mhm.
There's a whole teaching theory about how you learn language. Okay. So if that's the case, I actually think that inner voice could be stunted in childhood due to some trauma, whatever that trauma might be. Now, when those people get older and they don't have the inner voice and they haven't gone through the process, and that development starts to really impact them as an adult,
Mhm.
I actually think that that could be what we're looking at. That people who have gone through trauma or poverty or any number of different things that might actually create that break may not have the inner voice because it was stunted and it didn't grow.
You know, and that's like, that's all honestly kind of sad, given the statistic off of the first post that 30 to 50% of people probably don't have it, or just have it very, very
Limited.
very limited.
Right.
That's a really, that to me says, like, that kind of just makes my heart ache a little bit.
Sure.
When you
It's a
think
little
about,
scary.
right, how you got 50% of the population that just has gone through something. I mean, it's not like, it's no surprise that we, you know, a lot of people have suffering. I mean, everyone has suffering.
Right.
That's,
Everybody does.
but to have that level that it stunts your own voice. I mean, that's, I mean, take it down to like that, almost like a fundamental level, that you went through something that limited your own voice. And so now you have a hard time even thinking to yourself.
You're internally not able to express yourself,
Right.
because you weren't able to externally. Now that's just a theory.
Right. It's just a theory, but still, I
because
mean,
there's other ways to think about it. I mean,
Right.
the other stuff that I read, that's just one of the things I think that it really became kind of evident that if that's part of that development,
Mhm.
that people could be stunted in their inner voice because they never actually experienced the outer part of it. The other thing, though, that some of the studies talked about was that, you know, there's different ways to have an inner voice, because some people
Right.
hear actual words. I mean, that's my brain. That's what my brain does, is I actually have conversations and I look crazy in the car. Although, you know, you don't look crazy in the car anymore when you're talking to yourself, because most people think you've got it on speaker and you're talking to somebody else on your phone.
Right.
So I can look as crazy
Right. You
as
can
I
have
want
full
now.
conversations with yourself and no one even bats an eye.
No one even bats an eye. So that's a whole nother podcast.
Right.
But there are people who will have that their inner voice actually happens in pictures. Their inner voice happens in feeling,
Mm-hmm.
or their inner voice happens in some other modality, and it's not them talking to themselves. And that can be kind of how it works, right? The thing that is still, I'm going to be honest with you, the thing that's bothersome for me is that if everybody has a version of an inner voice, doesn't that mean that they should actually be aware of their surroundings
Right.
anyways?
Right.
Even if
there's
they're seeing it in
always some
pictures.
level of accountability. I'd say,
I agree.
I honestly, I'd say the elderly have a bit more of a leniency on how much that works, just given the age. You know, I think there's a lot of just very normal things that happen that limit that. So in those situations, I can be much more lenient
Yeah.
on how I would approach something like that. But I'd say if you're, you know, I'd say anywhere from 16 to 60. Let's say 16 to 60. There should be some level of accountability to your own actions. And I think
Absolutely.
that's probably one of the reasons why it's so prevalent right now, and that we see it so much after hearing about the statistic, is I think a lot of people right now just have a hard time taking accountability. I mean, accountability has really taken a hit over the last,
Oh, well, no one wants to
God,
be that.
but I think it's really taken a hit
Everyone
more
wants
recently.
Everyone wants to be a victim instead of an accountable person, is what.
But at the same time, I think given our vast internet usage, I think people are getting much more bold in saying whatever they want anonymously, and so they stop the accountability, the in-person accountability becomes much harder when you can say whatever you want online. You can do whatever you want online. No one's keeping you really accountable for that kind of stuff. So in the real world, it's just people aren't making those kind of decisions anymore, or they're just avoiding it altogether because they're not used to taking accountability for things, because no one's doing it to them. They've been saying whatever they want for a while now.
Right. And when push comes to shove, when you really when you see somebody like that and they've gotten used to it, and then they do something in the real world. I just said do. Sorry. I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I heard myself say it, and
I thought I was the one that made funny out of shit jokes.
It was
like, come on.
It was a friend's moment. I'm sorry that. Okay. Anyway. Woo! That took me offline. But so when people are pushed, there's a great quote. Okay, so I've recently really appreciated the show Yellowstone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Yellowstone has this great scene where this character who tends to be a bit, I would say, abusive to people. She's just one of the most awful characters, just because she's just so mean.
The daughter?
The daughter, yeah, blonde. Now, somebody is disagreeing with her about something. She was, having this moment with this kid that she's kind of adopted,
mm-hmm.
and she's being kind of mean to the kid. And this woman pulls out her phone and starts filming her and saying, "Hey, that's child abuse. That's child abuse." And she looks at her and goes, "That's not child abuse. This would be child abuse." And she just goes for it, right, with the kid, not smacking him around or anything, but pulls a shirt off of him and gets a little rough. And then she looks at the woman and she says, "You know what? Do you want some of this? Because if you're going to film it, then you're a part of it." And the woman backs off. She stops filming. And she goes, "I don't want any trouble. I don't want any trouble." And this is the line. The blonde girl, the daughter,
mm-hmm.
looks at her and says, "Oh no, you want trouble. You just don't want resistance."
Yeah.
And that is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, that's the truth. Because when resistance happens, then people are like, "Oh, that didn't feel good." But now they become the victim.
Right. And that's
as soon as there's resistance, now they're a victim, and it's like,
right.
Nah, I don't think so. So I agree with you about the accountability. But here's the other side of that. If you have this knowledge, if you know, okay, some people have it, some people don't, the inner voice,
mm-hmm.
Where's our accountability?
So to that, I think our accountability comes to, obviously, one, making sure that we're keeping ourselves in check with our own behavior, of our own actions, of our own thoughts. And there are levels to which you can control your own thoughts. That's something that should be practiced. That's not something, and to you guys, that's not something that's going to come right away. If you maybe don't find yourself talking to yourself all the time, I wouldn't say expect it to happen, because that's not something that just clicks.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So for us, it's keeping that kind of stuff in check. And that also means, when you're having a lot more conversations with yourself, you're also, I'd say you're almost more emotional, because you replay a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah.
You end up replaying a lot of conversations to figure out what you did wrong, what they did wrong, how you felt about it, how you could have done it. I had that moment when you were in a conversation, or you're just bantering with someone, they hit you with something really funny, but it was pretty mean, and you don't have anything to come back with, and then like 20 minutes later you come up with something because you've been thinking about it the whole time.
Right, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, then you want to go back and say it, but you can't. So it's like, I think that a part of the inner dialogue is, it can get very emotional.
Well, of course, because, and again, this is going back to Vygotsky. He says that it's part of your emotional regulation.
Right.
Because if you don't do that, if you don't have that inner voice, then, unless you're, paying $200 a week for a good counselor,
yeah,
then that inner voice is like your counselor. And it's part of that emotional regulation. Hey, I need to work this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
I really need to work this stuff out in my own head so that I'm safe.
Yeah.
Because your inner voice is going to be that thing that oftentimes is the thing that's going to keep you safe.
Yeah.
But it's also going to help you plan for the next time. Because if you didn't feel safe this time, something happened, you need to regulate that emotion. That inner voice, as it's playing, as you're playing that out, is actually helping you plan for the next time it's going to happen, because that's being human. That stuff happens, but it helps you play it out. And once you play it out and you've rehearsed it enough times, now you know where your boundary is, and now you have a response because you've practiced it. The inner voice oftentimes is practicing your own emotional regulation.
And I think that's actually helped me a lot when it came to my anger issues. You guys have plenty. No.
You have anger issues?
I just shut up. I was just gonna say, you and Mom, and I mean the rest of the family knows very well how angry I was for
He's a really
long.
angry kid, by the way.
I was a
really
really bad kid.
No, not a bad kid.
Well, I was.
He wasn't a bad kid. He had a lot of anger when he was a child.
So one of the things that
I could tell stories that'll be a whole
Shut
nother
up.
podcast.
Shut up! I'm making a point.
Okay, sorry.
One of the things that I started.
There it was.
Shut up! I'm not angry. One of the things. One of the things I started doing. I started having a lot of the conversations with myself as though I wasn't the same person.
Oh.
So it was kind of like I was separating myself from my anger. And I think that really helped me, especially the last couple of years. I'd say after I got out of high school is when I really started to take it seriously. Because I think that was when I started making my own money. So that means the things that I was breaking were mine. That means I was paying for
Always
them.
makes a difference.
Always makes a difference. I was breaking my own stuff because of my own anger, because of my own problems. So what I had to start doing is literally separating myself from my anger. And so when I would get angry at certain things, I'd literally have to separate myself and say, you know what happened last time. And I'd have basically conversations where I was like, I know, God, it just made me so angry. I just want to, put my fist through a wall. I'm like, no, you don't want to do that. No, hold on. Let's figure out how we can do this differently because you know what happened last time. So that's really helped me. And again, especially the last couple of years when I've been very, very conscious of it, where I am having very in-depth conversations with myself when certain emotions come up. I mean, this is something that I've learned through hearing other people talk about it, about emotional control, about dealing with unchosen suffering. I think that was a great way that someone else had put it. One of the things they said, and this is slightly unrelated, but one of the things that they said that I don't think I'll ever forget is the best way to reduce unchosen suffering is chosen suffering. Putting yourself in situations where you're having the hard conversations with yourself. You're putting in a lot of you into something that will ultimately benefit you. So let's just take anger. Unchosen suffering means something's going to happen and I'm probably going to react to it through anger. My chosen suffering was putting myself into places where I might get angry. And then I have the conversation with myself so that I can regulate my own anger. So my inner voice, my inner dialogue has done me a huge amount of good, especially in my own emotional life, because I'd have the conversations with myself, separating myself from my own emotions. And it helped me kind of delegate where I put my energy. It helped me, God, I'm trying to think of the word. It was almost like I was sitting in a room with several emotions. And it was like I was starting to choose which one was appropriate for the situation. So, because I don't think anger is essentially a bad thing. It's natural. If it's natural,
actually not.
But, however, it can be insanely dangerous if you don't have it under control.
Of course. So what I hear you saying, and again, I think this is a really good point.
I'm kind of thinking out of my. I'm kind of talking. I'm thinking while I talk.
Here's what I hear you saying is that anger in and of itself is not the negative.
Right.
It's the reaction or the behavior or the activity that you choose to let the anger out is actually the problem. Because whether it be anger or crazy or any number of different things, people judge you not by your inner thought process.
Yeah.
They judge you by your behavior. So if you're angry, that's a natural human emotion. People judge you by what you do with it. So if you get angry and you haul off and punch somebody and break their nose over whether or not they moved out of your way at the supermarket,
right,
you're going to get judged by the behavior, not the anger.
Yeah.
And that's actually really human. But you bring up a really good point, because what you did with it was a positive outcome. You're talking yourself through things. You're basically planning and regulating based on an emotion that you knew was kind of out of control for a while. right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I had to.
But what about, here's the question. What about those people who their inner voice is the shittiest voice that they've ever heard in their life? And
Hmm.
that voice is continuing to tear them down. One of the things I saw in the
Hmm.
studies that we looked at was the idea that the inner voice can actually be detrimental if you let it go down certain roads and it continues to talk negatively to you, if that's the inner voice that you have. I mean, we both know people that, maybe they deal with depression, maybe they deal with anger, but it's really out of their inner voice telling them kind of how awful they are. See,
Hmm.
that's the downside that I think that we also need to consider when you're talking about that inner
Right.
voice, that some people have an inner voice that they wish they could shut it off because it's
It is
negative. It's
so.
destroying
Yeah.
their self-confidence. It's destroying their self-image. It's destructive. I think we have a positive, I know I have a positive experience with my inner voice because my inner voice tells me, no, I'm sorry, that's not true. You are good enough. Okay.
Mm.
That's something that I have to fight all the time because I'll hear the messages from the outside and I'll be like, nope, 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 that's not true. I am worth it. And it's okay. Or when I'm angry, anger, I'll tell myself, hey, anger, that's natural. What you do with it's not. So what are you going to choose? So my interaction with my inner voice is positive, but not everybody has a positive interaction with their inner voice.
Well, and honestly, that's where we differ, is because my inner voice is not very positive a lot of the time. I mean, the anger, that was pretty much like a main focus that I had for a while. And so I was able to separate that and to get that under control. And now I'm at a point where even when I'm dealing with people who may not be using their inner dialogue a lot, I'm much more in control of how I deal with that kind of stuff. I'm much more in control of the conversations that I have with people. I mean,
Mhm.
I haven't really gotten into a place of extreme anger in a very long time. It doesn't happen very much. And that's because I did a lot of work. But that doesn't mean that my inner voice is nice all the time.
No.
Honestly, that's probably why. I mean, I've had a lot of struggles with confidence because my inner voice, I'd say, is more so negative than it is positive. I don't have that immediate, no, you are good enough. No, this is okay. No, you're doing all right. My inner voice is like, no, you could have done more. You probably should have done this. You didn't really do that. Honestly, this isn't really okay. I have that all the time. What I have to do is on it. What I've been learning to do, I think, is to take that outwardly, to start putting that out there so then I can change it in front of me. So I'll journal a lot. Like that's one of the things is I'll journal a lot. Sometimes, I mean, I've got very depressive tendencies. One of the things that has been a remedy for me is to have a cold shower because it kind of flips that a little bit
Hmm.
to where it's almost like my body reacts to the sensation of the cold. And this is something that like cold therapy is very, very therapeutic in this way because people who have, I'd say mild. I think severe depression needs to be handled differently,
Oh yeah.
but I'd say mild depression that can get more serious in waves.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good remedy for it because it shocks the body. It shocks the body out of that, and that's one of the things. I mean, it is highly recommended, especially for people who have high anxiety and high depression. Just take a cold shower, do a cold plunge, do something that gets you out of it,
Hmm.
because that inner voice can take over very, very quickly, and it can absolutely debilitate you for hours, days, weeks. Like it can really do a number on you if you don't get it under control. And so I've been working on it. I'm definitely not at the point where I have complete control over every thought that comes into my mind, but that is something I'm working on. And by the way, guys, this book right here, As a Man Thinketh, terrific advice when it comes to controlling your thoughts. That's something that is almost like a mini Bible. If I'm not reading my Bible when it comes to therapeutic reading, I'm going to pick up this book. It's a tiny little book you can get on Amazon for like $7 or $8, I think. It might be more now, but that's one of those books where it's all about thought. It's all about what your thought means and what it is going to produce depending on how you use it. So it's one of those things that, but it's definitely a struggle for me to have consistent positive thoughts, especially when my inner dialogue is most of the time telling me what I didn't do or what I did wrong or what I should have done. You know, when I should have talked to that person, but I didn't really, I was too afraid to, or when I didn't have the conversation with the coworker because it was going to lead to conflict, and but I should have done it, or when I should have sat down and read for 30 minutes but I didn't. It's like that voice is constantly criticizing me.
Okay. And you know, when you start shooting on yourself, because that's what I've heard
Right.
it's called shooting on yourself.
Right.
And for me, I mean, my voice is no different. Okay, so we all have that same critical voice. We're all thinking that stuff. One of the things that I've been practicing for many years, though, is to hold that thought captive.
Mhm.
Hold it captive. And when I say hold it captive, I'm not just talking about, you know, going putting it in a cage and leaving it alone.
Mhm.
Holding it captive means I hold on to it. I engage with it. I look at it and actually then decide if this is the voice of truth.
Mhm.
Because a lot of those voices that we have, I mean, all of that critical stuff, I know that's not the voice of truth. And so for my focus, I mean, I hear the same stuff, but the reason I can come back at it and be like, that's not true, because I know that that's not the truth about me.
So let me ask you then, how do you know what's true?
How do I know it's true?
Right. In those situations, because I think a lot of people will basically turn that inner voice into their own truth. And so whatever
Well,
that voice
sure.
is telling them is true. So how do you separate that voice from what you know to be truth?
Well, okay, so truth for me comes from my faith.
Mm-hmm.
Truth for me comes from my knowledge of what my God has said about me, my knowledge of the truth that He puts in my life, that I am loved, I am good enough. I mean, Christ wouldn't have died on the cross unless I was worth something
Mm-hmm.
for that gift. So, how do I know the truth? I know that that truth is the truth for me because I know God's character, and God's character doesn't say those things to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's not the voice of truth because that's not the voice of God. So I mean, without getting like ultra spiritual, the truth is that that's the truth. When I hear that criticizing, nagging voice who tells me I'm not good enough, I have to flip it because I know what the voice of truth would actually be saying to me if I were listening.
Mhm.
And when that voice of truth comes through, that's why I hold that thought captive. I want to look at it because there are times, okay? And here's that inner voice. This is why you hold the thought captive. There are times when I've done something that I need to be I need to ask for some forgiveness for.
Right.
So when that voice comes through, it's not criticizing.
It's
me.
taking accountability.
It's an accountability thing
Yeah.
where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
you know what? That was uncool. You might want to take
Mhm.
action on that. Okay. Because the voice of truth is going to get me to a place where I want peace
Mhm.
and I want joy. It's not going to bring me to a place where I'm so angry that I want to tear somebody's head off.
Right.
That's not the voice of truth. Not to say that we don't have fights.
Right.
Not to say that we don't, we as men don't look for battles.
Conflict is
It-
inevitable.
oh, you're right.
Suffering is inevitable. Like
those things happen.
there's going to be things that come up that will engage the voice, basically.
And as men, we look for those things. I actually think that there is a warrior heart in pretty much every man.
Oh yeah.
Okay, there's this thing about saving the damsel in distress, or getting on a motorcycle and driving 120 miles an hour.
I mean, that's
well, that's why we cheer the guys on the football field. That's why when you go to the World Cup and you see those guys running and that's why you cheer for them.
You want to see a man putting every shred of themselves into what they do, because that's just
right. And that's from a man's perspective. So I don't want to get too far at it because I watch women's soccer and I'm like, hey, I'm cheering for them the same way.
Congratulations, they have one fan.
Oh, okay. Anybody who heard that comment, please post.
I'm sorry. I
was that the intentional one? Yes.
That was a little intentionally okay. But you know what? Rapinoe.
Okay. No, stop. Stop.
She ruined soccer.
Stop.
What?
So anyway,
I never actually watched it.
So
I don't know anything about soccer.
I do. When the World Cup comes around, it's really fun. Those guys are so good. Those ladies are so good. Anyway, the point I'm making is that inner voice has to be sometimes intentionally not mine.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it isn't when I get that whole crappy stuff coming down,
Mhm.
right? So knowing God's character helps me hold captive those thoughts and understand where it is that I need to take accountability for
Mhm.
something I may have done wrong. That doesn't make me an awful person. Because when it comes to my personhood, whether I'm good or bad, God doesn't deal there.
Mhm.
He deals in love.
Mhm.
So I think that's how you turn it around.
I definitely think I think you're right about pretty much all of that. I think for me, it's almost like I'm putting it in a frame of your character. Because I think if your character is in line and if you can fight those voices with a good sense of character, and that could be a character in God. I mean, that could be a faith-based character.
Yeah.
But I think if you have, and I think I'm basically just repeating what you said in different language, but to me, that's kind of how I view it in myself is even if those thoughts are there, if my character is good and my actions are good, that, the actions that follow, then I think that's how I know that the voice isn't true. And again, that's basically a whole separate conversation I have to have with myself when it comes to those kind of
Right.
conversations is if I'm finding myself in a place where the inner voice is dominating my actions, I literally have to come to a point where I can stop myself dead in my own tracks, have the conversation about what kind of character and actions am I going to put forward, no matter what voice is telling me what I should do. And I think that's where it comes to. I mean, one of the things that recently I'd been opened up to was this idea of, again, kind of separating, but it was separating the flesh from the spirit. When we were at our men's group the other night, they were talking about that, how you separate the flesh from the spirit, because the spirit, whatever is in the spirit, whatever is God's will for you, is ultimately going to be what's best for you as well. The flesh is just the flesh. That's going to be the desires of your heart. That's going to be the unintentional negative thoughts, that unintentional negative dialogue. That's the flesh. But the spirit is what's best for you. And so I think if I can make that classification, if I can make that distinction between the two, and I can separate those and have the conversation with myself, let my inner dialogue control by the spirit versus by the flesh, I think that's when I end up producing better outcomes for myself. That's when I make better decisions. That's when I do sit down to read, because the spirit says you should read. The flesh says you don't want to read. One of them is clearly better for me.
Right.
But I need to make that distinction. I need to be able to separate the two and say, which one am I going to choose?
Right. So
that's kind of how I've been viewing it.
And so what I hear you saying is that you've learned a different way of holding that thing captive.
Exactly. Exactly.
That was what you did, is you captivated that
Right.
thought, and now you're like, okay, and now I'm gonna evaluate. I'm gonna evaluate which one's truth.
And all of that is going on in my head. It's not like I'm drawing out a symbol of it. I mean, shit, I lost my train of thought.
Well, he lost his train of thought because he really did just knock over his microphone.
Shut
but
up.
We'll get back to it.
Shut up.
We're going to leave that in.
Shut up.
But you're holding that thing captive. You're
Right.
you're basically saying that you're taking those things and you're putting them outside of yourself, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You are taking that thought and being like, okay, I'm going to look at you outside of myself and see and really test it. Is that truth? And really, when I look at it, it's I'm not testing it against my truth.
Right.
And that's
a hard.
That's really
you
key.
really have to be careful about that.
Is it my stuff that I'm testing against? Because if I test that against my stuff, I'm like, yep, that might be true. I do suck. But when I test that against the truth, and I look at that and I go, okay, I can do better, but I don't suck.
Yeah.
Because that's not the truth about who I am as a man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's that whole. And here's when we get right down to it, when we talk about accountability, because that's what you're doing. You're identifying, where am I accountable in this thought process?
What's basically
what's happening in here that makes me accountable?
Well, and what's the takeaway for other people to be accountable for themselves? I mean, that's kind of what, again, that's a big part of what we want to be able to do is what's the takeaway?
Okay.
What can what can you guys learn from the inner dialogue? Do you have it? Do you not?
Well,
How
okay.
does it affect you? All that stuff. Like, I mean, what are we getting at here?
Okay, so here's the deal. Okay. When you're in situations when your inner dialogue is telling you something and you can clearly see that somebody else's inner dialogue is not giving them the same message. Okay. Having this knowledge, understanding that everybody has varying levels of it, you have the accountability, the responsibility to regulate yourself.
Yeah.
And you know what? And I'm the worst culprit of this. You guys, you've seen me drive. I get so mad. The reality is you know who's mad at that moment? Me. You know whose blood pressure goes up and almost has a heart attack? Me. You know what that other person is thinking? Nothing. Because that's the point of this whole conversation is they're not even recognizing that until I have some
until you externally show
to do something to, and then they're like, oh yeah, well screw you too.
Right. Because they have no idea what they did wrong at that point.
Most of the time. So you know what? It's really on us.
Yeah.
It's really on us to regulate that and don't get so angry. I mean, honestly, what's the point of getting angry when that other person really doesn't know what they did wrong? But I believe it's also on us that when we have good relationships and good friends, that when someone isn't maybe having that thought process, I really do think that as good friends, it's our responsibility
to call them out,
a little bit, and have the come on, man. I call it the
come on
man conversation.
Yep. You got to have the hard conversation to
because it's
sometimes make a point with someone who doesn't know. But again, however,
that conversation can never be out of anger because then you're right back where you started. It's you have that conversation out of love and well-being for that other person.
Right.
And we were talking the other night when we were kind of thinking about doing this episode. And we were talking about what if a guy is just being a complete dirtbag to his girlfriend or his wife in front of you, like just really being stupid. Well, for his own well-being, are you not going to pull him aside and be like, hey man, you know what? That was just really uncool. You really hurt her feelings and we're really just out to have a good time tonight. You might want to apologize, right? Having that hard conversation because whatever that was, and I'm not perfect. I've done it. I've done it. But whatever that was.
I'm single, so I don't have to worry about it. So.
That's a whole nother episode as well.
Intentionally stupid all I want.
Let's talk about your dating life, Zach.
No.
Okay, let's not. But the idea being that it's up to me to call that out. And I would hope that my friends would call that out too. I would hope that if I was being intentionally stupid and did something to my wife that was uncool, that somebody would call me out and be like, hey, you know what? And it's not that there are times, honestly, we've all had in relationships, there's no fight that's one way. I'm sorry, there's never been a fight. But all I can do is take responsibility for my side of it. And if I did something that was stupid, I need to take responsibility for that. I need to be accountable for that. And you know what? If it's because my inner dialogue was disengaged at that moment and I didn't think about the impact of whatever it was that I did or said, you know what? That's up to me.
Right.
And I would have the same conversation because what I really want is somebody to re-engage my inner dialogue. So the next time that thing comes up,
then you got
that voice is there that says, ooh, yeah, don't do that again. That was really dumb.
Well, and to what you just said about basically being accountable of helping other people realize what they did.
Yeah.
I think there's also something to be said about surrounding yourself with people who are going to call you out just as much because sometimes your inner dialogue might be lying to you. You might think it was perfectly okay. And if you don't have anyone else around you that's going to check your own behavior, then you're going to keep making that kind of mistake. And that's just as bad as you letting someone else make the mistake without you saying something.
Okay. Perfect example. Men's group a couple weeks ago. I don't think you were there. We were talking about something that's going on in my life. And I was talking and I made the statement that I said, in this area, I'm a complete idiot. And then I just kept on talking. And one of the guys stopped me about 5 minutes later. And he goes, I want to challenge you on something. He said, I want to challenge you. I don't see you as an idiot in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I find you to be one of the smartest guys I know. Okay. And I mean, to me, I was just making a reference to a part of my life that I feel like I could be I could have more education in.
Mhm.
But my self-talk, which came out as verbal at that moment, was I think of myself as a complete idiot. And it was so great to have somebody stop me and say, that self-talk is that's poor language and you're not. So it was almost like the voice of truth actually came out of somebody else at that moment. But what a great example of in our men's group, every now and again, somebody will say something and it's open for discussion. And when people challenge us, man, it's so great.
Right.
It's so great to have that.
Which again, I think is few and far between of people who really want to be, maybe not want to be, but are so okay with being wrong that they are surrounding themselves with people that might be, what's the word? Willing to challenge.
Yeah.
That's, I think I'm still working on that, but I think I'm relatively good at being very okay with being wrong. I'm having a hard time when it comes to like failure, but being wrong, I think those are two different things.
Completely different things.
Yeah, being wrong and failing at something are different things. So I'm really, really good about being wrong about stuff because in my mind, if I'm wrong and no one tells me, I'm going to continue being wrong. If I'm wrong and someone tells me, that just created another opportunity for me to be right in the future. And I would prefer that so much more because my inner dialogue might not be telling me about it.
Right.
So I think, yeah, absolutely. You made great points. Definitely keeping it helps keeping your anger under control. It's going to keep you accountable. It's going to help you to cultivate relationships with other people, helping your communication to help keep them accountable, and hopefully vice versa, they can keep you accountable. What else? Is there anything else?
No, I think that's it. Because that inner voice, I mean, here's the other part of it. I think
and then being self-aware.
Being self-aware. But just understanding that not everybody's on the same level.
Right.
Having that understanding, starting with that.
Right.
And when you're talking, like, I mean, you
and
really
again,
think about
that's a hard mountain to climb.
Did that person intentionally try to hurt me or cut me off? No,
Right.
They just weren't thinking. Okay, and that's what I phrase it as. They just weren't thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, see, that's easier for me to take, and my blood pressure stays low when that's what I can take because I understand not everybody. The fact that we learned that 50% of the people in the world,
right, makes me feel a little bit better.
It makes me feel better, and it actually gives me the opportunity to have grace.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of forgiveness there, and forgiveness not because someone needs to be forgiven. That's not the point. It's forgiveness in my own heart, because forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's actually it's an activity that I need to have. To be forgiving is actually an activity that's a positive thing for your own emotional status.
And sometimes you got to talk yourself through forgiving someone else.
That's right.
That's a big part of it.
Deal.
I've definitely taken that into my own life. I've had several situations over the last, I'd say 2 years, where I've had to have conversations about forgiving someone who might not have deserved it. But to me, one of the things that I've really learned is obviously if someone makes you angry, they just became your master. That's one of the things. I've heard that quote just several times. That's really, really changed how I think about it.
The whole idea that nobody can make you do anything. No one makes you sad. No one makes you angry. Someone can do something and you can choose anger. Someone can do something and you can choose sadness. So, I mean, you get away from the idea, and all of a sudden the reason that gives you accountability, it actually gives you some power over those emotions. Because when someone makes you angry, they just controlled every piece of you. If they can do that. Well, God love them. They're really good. They must be really smart. If they can do that to you, then, oh boy, they could take you all down all kinds of roads. But they shouldn't.
Yeah.
All right.
So we want to open up the comments for you guys. Do you have an inner dialogue? How often do you think you use it? And how does it affect your life? I mean, what kind of things have you experienced in your daily life that now that you may have been, I mean, you may have already known about this, but maybe this is a whole new topic, and does it change how you think about things?
Yeah, how does
again, this is what we want. We want to have the open conversation of, has this happened to you? Does it affect you? And
how does it impact you? I would love to hear how your inner dialogue impacts yourself, or your inner dialogue, or the lack of somebody else's inner dialogue impacts you. All right.
So leave us a comment, like the video, subscribe so that we can keep
doing it.
Keep doing it. That's what we want. We want to keep doing it.
We want to have the conversation. We love opening these things up.
So,
and hopefully at some point we'll get this thing live and we'll actually have some conversations because we think that would be a lot of fun.
And hey, if you guys didn't already notice, obviously we've got a little bit of core up now. We're still working on it. We've got a couple more pieces we're gonna get up, and I know that the top one you probably can't see it, so we're gonna work on that. That'll be
yeah, we're getting there.
We're getting there.
We hope that you enjoy what's happening now.
And real quick, before we go, how's your workout life been going? How's your health?
Yeah, okay. Doing? So, on the last episode, I did ask, or I said, hey, I'm going to start this thing. And
what have you been doing the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, you know what? I've pretty much not done too well. Super Bowl happened last weekend, and that was, and there was a bunch of parties this weekend. So, you know what? I haven't done real well, and I'm okay. I'm not, pounding myself down because of it, but I've started exercising more. So that's a positive. Although the rain is kind of putting a bit of a damper on that, but I do have the gym. I know I got to go for the gym. I can go to the gym. However,
rain ain't stopping nobody.
But I am also seeing my doctor this week, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to get a little bit of motion or movement on getting a little bit of help there as well. So I am working on it. I am thinking about it. The first step towards movement is thought. I've been thinking about it. I've been really trying. Trying to cut a few things out, so I'm getting there, but I haven't had a real good week, so I just want to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you guys, and hopefully hold myself accountable that the next time we are on camera, that I will be able to say that I've lost some weight. So I'm going there. I'm getting there. So, thanks for holding me accountable.
Absolutely. Got to. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right. Bye.